It's been a pretty amazing 2 days. I've certainly learned a lot, and I know I'm sort of the token economist in some ways, but I can also tell you I learned a lot from pretty much everybody here, and in the end, it needs to be all of the above, right? We kind of know this, right? We need Paul's vision, we need John Krasnick's polling, we need Richard Durham's Oberlin project, we need it all. What I would like to add to this discussion is a bit of the economics point of view. And essentially, where I come down on at the end is that in the end, it needs to be policy change that actually drives the result, that drives the final outcome. So I guess I could have introduced myself in various ways. I was sort of, endangered species or so. The one thing I didn't want to say was neoclassical economist, even though that's in the program. It's really not about that, right? It's not about neoclassical economics, not about neoliberal ideology or anything along these lines. It is about smart economics, which pretty much includes, within economics, once again, all of the above. And what I would like to do is, if there's time, tell you 2 stories, if not, only one, but certainly start with this story here. What drives our car purchasing behavior? Right? And I can give you my answer. I don't have a license. So I don't face this choice. And that's probably one answer, right? A room full of environmentalists. Maybe we shouldn't be driving. Maybe we should be living in urban environments where driving simply isn't an option or isn't necessary. And absolutely, that's one answer too. But realistically, of course, people do in fact face a choice of which car to buy, not whether to buy a car. Unfortunately, in many ways, but still, that's the choice architecture given to us. And then, in our world, in the climate world, we basically have a choice between more fuel-efficient cars and less fuel-efficient cars. Now, here's how an economist models this. Right? You are a hyper-rational human being. You walk into the car dealership. You choose a car based on brand, color, cylinders, looks, general feel, and then start comparing prices, yada, 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 right? You do all these things. You do it perfectly well because you're hyper-rational, and then you make your decision. And it is very, very easy to make fun of this, right? Because we don't act. It wouldn't be rational to do this, right? It wouldn't be rational to stand there, solve second-order conditions in the car dealership, and certainly not when you're buying a light bulb or something that costs $5 and still more or less makes a difference because you can buy the green choice versus the non-green choice. Now, there's a couple points here. One, economists actually don't think that this is really what's going on. What economists do think is that people behave as if this was the case. And once again, right, let's all laugh about this because, no, people don't even behave as if this was the case. It is laughable in many ways. So, an easy answer, or an answer that features prominently on New York Times bestseller lists at the moment, and is sort of the answer that is fun to talk about, is to look at other things other than this rational behavior. And sort of the kinds of things where we would say, actually, this is beyond economics. Labels is one, right? So we moved from labels on the top left here that really didn't say much of anything to ones that include all the behavioral economics and all the psychological and sociological conclusions from the latest few decades of research and try to nudge us in the right direction. And as an economist at EDF, I'm happy to say I've had a couple colleagues who've worked very, very hard to put this in place, to make it as sensible as possible, to not just talk about miles per gallon, but talk about the cost to you, the savings to you, and where you compare to your neighbor in a sense, where you compare to the next guy buying a car. And we need this. We absolutely need this. let's get back to economics for a while. Sort of, what many of us would think to be the sort of typical economics 101 taught, first semester, freshman year. There's a pretty crisp question we can ask about this trade-off between buying a more fuel-efficient car versus buying the cheaper, less fuel-efficient car. And the most direct comparison is, let's compare $1 in fuel savings later to how much you're willing to pay today to achieve that $1 in fuel savings. Right? And the hyper-rational model would say, well, you're supposed to spend 100 cents today for 100 cents savings later. A buck is a buck is a buck. Another conclusion would be to say, this is silly. Of course not, right? If anything, it's much closer to zero. A couple economists, Hunt Alcott and Nathan Wasney, I'm happy to say they're both about my age, did this study very recently and came up with this. Making the most asinine assumptions about human behavior you could possibly imagine, no one should behave that way. Their result is that we are willing to spend 70 cents today for $1 in fuel savings later. And you can look at this and draw two conclusions. One is, told you so, right? People aren't rational. It should be a buck today for a buck in fuel savings later. Another conclusion is to say, this is not all that bad. Given from where we started, assumptions that no one believed to begin with, we are getting 70%, over 2/3 of the way toward what the answer, quote unquote, should be. Now, the conclusion, of course, from all of this is, right, we ignore economics at our peril. Now, should we use behavioral economics to get from 70 to 80 to 90 to 100? Absolutely. Should we use psychology, sociology, anything in the book to get us to the 70 in the first place, in the sense that we need all these tools to be able to use the economic policy solution to get there, for example, gas taxes? Again, absolutely. But the intervention, the one intervention that has the biggest impact, the biggest lever here, is in fact the boring old solution that no one will win a Nobel Prize in economics for, because the guy who came up with it died a year before the first Nobel Prize was given out, right? Pigou. So this is the kind of system, the kind of solution that it's kind of boring to talk about, especially at a conference like this where we are looking for the new thing and alternatives to this standard framework. But we ignore this standard framework at our peril. Now, how am I doing on time? Do we have time for?
You've got another 7 minutes.
7 minutes, okay. So let's go a bit more personal. This is my 11-month-old. When he was 3 weeks old, flying to Austria to see his grandparents. He's wearing a small carbon footprint hat. Right? We don't have a stroller for the kid, still not. We carry him around everywhere. We don't have a car, I don't have a license. He eats only vegetarian fare. Trying to do all the right things, right? Trying to be the good environmentalist. And I feel good about this, and my wife sometimes doesn't quite agree with these choices, but usually we go along with them, I'm happy to say. But still, right? Then we do stuff like this, or stuff like that. That's me bumped up to first, thank you British Airways, on a way to a United Nations-sponsored climate talk in Bangkok. It's a fruit basket on the right. That's my laptop writing about the turn to climate safety. And it was a pretty comfortable experience. I saw my parents in Austria 6 times one year, 5 out of those 6 times to and from UN-sponsored climate talks. You go to Bangkok, have lunch with your parents. Go to Barcelona, have tea with your dad. You go to Copenhagen, well, that's a no-brainer, of course. It's around Christmas time, so you stop by before and after. Right, so yes, I'm trying to do all the right things. And then I do this. That's a problem, to put it mildly, right? It's a real problem. And we all know the numbers, right? So one transatlantic flight is 1 ton of CO2 emissions. Average American, 20 tons. Average European, 10. I have 2 citizenships, so I guess I can add them all up. I admit about 30, at least. All right, so we basically, we know the implications of this. We know that every one of these tons, on average, at least, very conservative value, causes about $20 worth of damage to the planet, to ecosystems, the environment, to all of us, human health, to the economy as well. $20, 1 ton. Right now, that knowledge leads some of us, most of us in this room, probably, to go out and buy offsets. Right? $20 of damage for my flight to see my parents over Christmas. Let me spend 20 bucks, go to Terra Pass, give them 20 bucks, they plant a tree or cover a methane pit, and you can feel good about flying. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, right? We should be doing that kind of thing. We should be doing much, 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 much more of that. But that's the point. So there are basically 3 problems with me buying these $20 offsets. And I'm happy to say that EDF does it for me, so I actually don't need to spend the money for the most part. Right? As a good, law-abiding NGO, we do all of this ourselves. But problem number 1, it doesn't add up to anything. Voluntarily offsetting emissions, it's a niche market, and people are making a lot of money off that, some people, but it's a handful of people, and it basically doesn't really figure into the larger picture. The planet doesn't notice. That's point 1. Right. Point 2 is, which is a bit more dramatic and a bit more, has a bit bigger implications here, is that me buying these 20 bucks now suddenly makes me feel good about flying. Right? Why else would airlines offer that option on their homepage? Some of them, right? You go there, you pay for your ticket, they make sure that happens first, and then you get the option to spend another 20 bucks to offset your emissions that your flight will have caused. They certainly don't want to make you feel bad about flying, right? They want to make you feel good about flying, and as a result, hope to do more of it. And the reasons why airlines probably do it is because, in fact, people do fly more when you get this option. Right? That's the second problem. Now, the third problem, and probably the biggest one out there, is this doesn't do anything at all to the incentives of the airline. They don't fly more fuel-efficient planes. They don't change their routes. Nothing like it. They might paint their tailwing green or put a tree on the annual report, and they do that too, of course, right? But none of the stuff that actually matters. Now, it turns out, in this case, we do have a system that does change things, that does matter. The European Union, starting January 1 of this year, started to incorporate aviation, all flights into the EU, within the EU, and out of the EU, into its emissions trading system. It's not perfect. It turns out to be about $2 per transatlantic flight, not $20. It's a first step. But it's certainly a significant step. It covers 1/3 of all global miles flown. That's the kind of thing that really does make the planet notice. Now, should we jump from all of this to essentially the preferred economic solution and cap and trade, in a sense, or carbon taxes, or sort of the big policy push? I mean, in a sense, yes, right? That's what jumps out of it. This is the kind of policy change that we ought to be working for, the only one that actually does have a large enough impact. Now, we all know the story, of course. Climate change fizzled 2 years ago, and we ought to be looking at other levers, other policy levers on the state level, right? Solyndra notwithstanding. Energy policy is mostly done on the state level in this country. So we need to look at that. We need to look at the city level. Mayor Bloomberg put in 300 miles of bike paths in New York City. Right? That's a good thing. We need to pull the highest policy level possible. But at the end of the day, we do need to keep in mind that the only way to have this kind of impact is to look at large policy change, significant policy change, reorienting these market forces in a way that doesn't just make us feel good, but actually does make the planet notice in a sense that Paul talked about on the first day, and we all know has to happen in order to create a livable planet for us, for our children. This is my son. And for all of us together, because at the end of the day, we know that that's the solution. We need all of us to work toward it. But please, 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 let's keep this in the back of our minds at the very least. When we do try whatever system, whatever intervention we can think of that could potentially make a difference to solve this problem. Thank you.